So in this presentation, we are going to talk about new flip SOP in Houdini 19.5. And in this example, we are going to explore like how you can do like low-res sim and just up-res the details where you want. But before we dive into the scene, I wanted to show you some new example that you can use flip SOP. For example, something like this was really hard to do in Houdini 19 and older version, to use like custom object to actually create your tank simulation. In this case, it's circle that expanding. This is also another version, like totally different object that you can use to simulate your tank. It can be flat tank, or it can be just wavy tank. And also other approaches that you can do now, something that was hard before, is that if you want to simulate something like this, you need to simulate actually huge domain to actually simulate something on a pad. And with the new flip SOP, with the custom boundary, you can actually simulate and optimize your sim time a lot, because you're just focusing, for example, only in the area what you want. And this is really simple object. Is just box that expanding based on the curve. And these are again different ideas, two sims colliding, one is expanding, one is coming in, and this is like totally custom object that I actually built with the VDB, like box, and then just erode the areas that I like, or just add few boxes, combine them, and use that, for example, this one as a container. So you see it's really stable, and you can really simulate now totally different types of look of your container. And like I said, this can be actually pretty optimized for sim time, because, for example, camera can only look on the rubber toe and just follow it and clash with the other one. So for this presentation, we are actually going to talk about this example just in a simple version. So what I did here is that I simulate all these first low-res. So this is like low-res sim. All the boats are chasing each other. After that, I took bounding box around every boat, and following the same idea with the rubber toy, just following the boat in with some bit of extent, and running the high-res sim. And I was doing that. All these boundary were combining it as a one boundary, so that when the both are actually colliding, the flip is actually intersecting. So you can see here, actually all this is upres, but you see when they are intersecting, they are actually look like it's one continuous sim. So all this is simulated as a one single upres sim. After that, this is kind of how that look combined. So you see all the details. So the main problem with blending is you want to blend these kind of edges and to blend them into the low-res part. So you need to have some kind of fading, especially in velocity field, and also in terms of surface field, and also the mesh, so that everything blends seamlessly, so that you don't have this kind of visible, let's say, lines. So this is how the mesh look. So you can see here the high-res detail blends smooth into the low-res one, and more or less the action is what you think is behind the boat. After this area, it's more or less white water that stay on the surface, and all the action is more or less around the boat and bit behind because of the engine and all the splashes. So more or less this can be the like limit where your upres can live. After that, it's just for the foam to stay, and it's going to be moved with a low-res sim. Now it's up to you, because, for example, in this case, I use really low-res sim and really high-res sim to see where is kind of limit, how much maybe the low-res sim could be a bit better. But I just wanted to see how much I can actually save time. So this low-res sim can simulate, let's say, 10 minutes or faster, and high-res can be maybe 1 hour. And I can see, okay, this is maybe enough for this shot, or I maybe need to upgrade my low-res sim to be maybe a bit more higher, to add more interesting details in a low sim part. So, and this is white water. So what I did, I combined fields from the high-res sim and the low-res sim and use simple standard Houdini whitewater tool and run. So what I did feed in the whitewater solver, I said that in this case that my low-res sim and high-res sim is actually one single sim. So what actually I was building the simple workflow that my whitewater sim actually see this entire container as one sim. There is nothing split. So even if the splash go outside, or you can put, for example, custom whitewater sims here, the whitewater will always see as a one single input from the combined sim. So let's dive into Houdini. So this is the simple. I will show you the preview because I cannot do the live sim because it will take a lot of time. So this is how actually look low-res sim. It's just jumping whale, huge, chasing the boat. So as you can see, there is a lot of nice a lot of nice churning behind the boat. And only thing is that I want to upres is, let's say, this section. And this upres can be actually be any geometry that you like. It can be based on the camera frustum. It can be sphere, rectangle, whatever you want. So it's really your freedom. Like I was showing in the previous example, it's really freedom of your boundary that you can create, for example, in this case, upres, however you want. So this was my upres. So I use like bigger container because I see that my waves, high-res wave traveling, further away. So this was kind of the limit that I found is needed for, upres section because of the rubber toy actually splashing and adding more waves. So this is how this actually look combined. So you see immediately there is some of the problems here, that this is actually not in a low-res sim. Again, this was kind of really low-res comparing to the high-res. So our idea is to try to blend this as much as possible and feed in a whitewater solver so that we can run our whitewater sim as as a one single. And also for the meshing that we blend all these high-res details at the edge of our upres container into the low-res one, so that when we render water, everything look seamlessly blended, and that these kind of details fade away how they close to the edge of our upres container. So this is how the actually mesh look. There is a few errors. It can be fixed, but you can see here how the upres details kind of fade away and blend into the, let's say, low-res waves. So that kind of blending of upres, and it's kind of help you to seamlessly blend these two sims. Like I said, in this case it's rectangle shape, but it can be any other shapes. And this is how the white water actually look. I mean, this is two flip together, so this part is not blended, but you can see that white water, as soon as it leave the upres area, it seamlessly blend into low-res and just continue doing its own thing, what is happening in the background of the low-res sim. So in Houdini, so first thing, I will not, because we are kind of limited with the time. There is really nice detail explanation from Thomas. He did a really nice SIGGRAPH presentation about flip solver and how you do low-res upres sim. So if you want to go into more detail about new one, you can check SIGGRAPH presentation. So in terms of, so also one thing that we were saying, one thing that I like is I like to put some details into camera. So when I'm doing my wedges, I have information and I can see, okay, low fluid, low polygon count, high-res polygon count. And you can do it pretty simple with just, adding GeoNode attached to the camera and just adding font node that will put frame, CNAME, which will be there. And this is some other information. Just reading the point count from my null node that is attached to the different assets. So this is one way with a simple let's say for the dailies, you can put some information that you like. Also, you can put the cache pad. So when you run your preview, you immediately know from which scene it came. So when you save your scene and save version up, that preview will be attached for that scene, and you know from where it came. So in this case, we have two assets. One is boat, one is the creature. So one thing that I like to do is like split some areas. So for this, bringing the asset, now it's with polysop, convert to polygons. There are some attributes that I don't like. So, clean geometry. So this is going to feed into FLIP solver, because FLIP solver now, FLIP SOP is now using different approach. So there you just need to plug your geometry, and then there is a FLIP collide that will do all the conversion and everything that is needed for you later. And the bottom part is actually, because they still didn't update whitewater tools, it's still the old one. This is collision for the whitewater solver. So it's same for the boat, same for the creature. For the fluid part, like I said, this is something that is explained in that C graph. So first thing, this is our boundary that I'm simulating the low res. In this case, I was actually animating to follow my boat. So it's actually expanding how the boat is going, so that even this is already optimized. So instead of creating single container size, you can actually animate it and just, this will be slower and slower how the container expand. But instead of simulating big one, you can actually simulating and extending. So you can cut your simulation by 50%. So the same boundary is going to be used. The bound of that will be used for the upres one. So this is just the upres one. I use the Boolean because my initial boundary is going outside of the static container. This one. So this is the Boolean just to minimize it to be inside. So this is how now the upres and the low res tank look together. So upres is only focusing in this area, and low res is just expanding. So this is the default way that they create. So you will have the flat tank in initial one, then you will bring your boat geometry, in this case rubber toe and boat, plug into the FLIP collide, and then there is a FLIP solver initial frame. Let's see how long will that take. So this is in initial frame for the low res one. So when you cache you will see in that video, Thomas will explain more detail. You cannot use fluid compress because you need original information from the FLIP solver. So you actually cache without fluid compress, because fluid compress will remove pressure field and other fields and only save surface and volume and calling particles. So in this case, you are bypassing the fluid compress and simulate everything. Let's see, where is the cache in my case? So it will actually simulate default, the original stuff from the FLIP solver, like surface, velocity, field, and the pressure. And this is what you are feeding in the last input of upres sim. So upres sim, again, this is the difference is that particle separation here is 0.1, and in this case is 0.035. So it's a lot more detail. So the only thing is that, feeding the low res sim in the last input of the high res FLIP solver in the boundary input, and now you can simulate with the fluid compress because you don't need any more data. So this is the result of the low res sim, and this is the result of the high res sim. So in this case, you can always come back and change your geometry however you want, and just oppress that area around the object. So for example, you are happy with your low res sim, you are done with that, and now the focus is just oppressing, maybe from the camera, maybe, like I said, different kind of objects. So this is kind of the initial point of going like simulating low res and simulating the upres. It's really nothing complex. It's really, simple setup. You have only, FLIP tank, FLIP collide, and then it's a FLIP solver. So the only thing to be careful, you need to save original data that is coming from the FLIP solver. if there is any question, be free to ask before we go. No? Okay. So the next thing is, because for the whitewater solver, if we want to use default one, we actually have different, so this one. So we have surface field with a different resolution for the low-res sim, and then we have surface and velocity field again with high-res detail from the other one. If you just take these two and plug into the white solver, it's not going to work, and especially it's going to, because you can just combine the surface field, but the problem is going to be what we are going to do, like I said, with our edges that are not seamlessly blend. So whitewater, if you just combine this as a simple VDB operation, VDB combine, the problem is our whitewater is just going to jump from one frame. When the whitewater expand close to the edge, you will see the visible line because there is no velocity outside of the same speed like it was in an upres container. So the next approach, we need to blend this to look like I said, one single sim. So like in Houdini, there is many different ways that you can do the same task. This was me just R&D when the Houdini 19.5 was in alpha stage, so I never go and make it better and better. So I will show you like one simple approach that actually can give you the result pretty good and fast. So for the whitewater, so what we have here is that we have high-res volume. So we are bringing the high-res sim and low-res sim. And for the whitewater, we just need volume, surface, and velocity field. So here we are just isolating. So this is the low-res surface and velocity, and this is coming from the high-res. So these are two parts. So this is combining the surface field, and this part is going to be combining velocity field. So what I did here, first isolating the low-res one. So this is how the low-res velocity field look, and this is how the high-res velocity field look. Sometimes I use VDB resample just to resample, because sometimes VDB combine can make some strange artifacts. So in this case, I'm just resampling the velocity field to match like upres one. So you see, and now the next thing, I want to cut velocity field. In this case, like I said, there is many different approach. I want to cut velocity field from the low-res one, where is the high-res one. So in this case, I'm bringing the bound from the high-res one, expanding a bit, and just converting VDB from polygon. And like I said, there is a VDB clip or VDB activate, so many different ways that you can do it. But in this case, I'm using VDB activate, and it's kind of eating my, let's say, or deleting the velocity field from from where the high-res area are, and just preparing me to combine where was the high-res one. So I will just remove this. So the same thing I'm doing for the high-res one. So just different intersect, and this is where I combine them both. But the main problem is that there are the visible edges, and the velocity are not smoothed in this area. So when you run the whitewater, maybe in this area close to the high-res one will be really fast. So your whitewater will go outside of the upres area, and because there is nothing in a low-res area, he will just stop and just flow. So you can get like visible lines of your whitewater sim. So one approach is I'm taking this object and telling that I want to blend both velocities, so low-res one and high-res one, and blend them seamless. Just I want to high-res velocity freeze close to edge to blend into the low-res one. So with this one, you will see now with and without. Yeah, it's hardly visible here. Let me go back in this frame, maybe it's going to be more visible. there is a frame. And yes.
In the previous versions.
Yes, I mean upres, not like this one, not like this one, but combining you can do in version 15 if you want. But this kind of simple approach of upresing, now that they provided the tools, it can be a bit harder to do, not in this easy way, let's say, with a custom boundary. So you need more time. But the blending part, it's really nothing special. It's more or less you blending few fields, and just blending the edges and the logos. Okay. So in this case, with a simple bounding box, this one we want to blend the upres one and low-res one. So this is just taking the volume sampled. So the second input from the low-res one, and the third input is that bounding box. So with a simple, mixing the two velocity field based on that mask. In this case, we have spline ramp, so that just blend how much we want. So at the end, what we got here is the single velocity field. So blending the upres one, and so this is how the low-res one look. So this is now the blend of the both field, and this is what we are going to feed in our whitewater solver. So here now it's going to see just a single blended velocity field, and now this is more or less like cleaning the stuff and hiding the primitive. And this is my velocity combine, and now I can go to doing the same approach with the surface field and prepare for the whitewater sim. So in this case, again, I'm splitting the low-res one. So this is the low-res surface field, and this is the high-res surface field. So again, with the same idea, I'm taking the upres container, removing the upres part, upres area from my low-res surface field. And this is what I'm going to combine with my upres one, but upres one with the flattened edges. So the next step is I want to take this upres surface field, and I want to blend these edges so that they are seamlessly continue into the low-res one. So again, I'm using the upres container area just to remove the bit of VDB outside of the sim domain. So the next step, what I'm doing is, sometimes the blending is it's a lot easier to do on the polygons. So I'm converting both low-res one and high-res one into the polygons. So as you can see here, a lot of points. And this is the low-res one. So I can just isolate, maybe doesn't need to be this big. I can take the size of the high-res container, bit more expansion. And I'm creating with the simple attribute wrangler, like another like position attribute, like coming from the low-res one, and attribute transfer them, to the high-res. Again, there is different idea that you can use point cloud and different approach to do the same thing, but I like to do at the beginning like simpler version when I'm showing something that they can pick up really faster. So at the end, what I have here, I have position from the original one and position load that is coming from the low-res one. And the same thing, I'm taking the same mask, like density box, and doing the blending based on that edge. So you can see how this is blending into the low-res. So what is his blending is in actually, so you can see here, reading the position low and the sampling that bounding box and sampling original one based on height. So this is just to blend. I don't want to blend everything. I just want to blend the height. So when I create a new VDB, it's more or less the same size. Only this white area is going to be blended into the position attribute from the low-res container. So this is how it look, with and without the blend. So the most important are the edges close to the container. After that, I'm converting back to VDB using the same voxel. I don't need to remember what was the voxel size. I can just sample the input from the previous one. And now I have the low-res VDB and the high-res VDB. And now I can join them with VDB combine, like SDF union. And you can see now we don't have visible edge. If I disable this node, we are actually going to have visible edge here. And when we advect our white water, it's just going to jump in this frame and it's going to look really strange. But with this simple approach, transferring the position from the low-res one and the blending, you actually blend your edges. And now this actually look like one single sim. And because, edges, and I mean, even if you want this blending area can be, longer. I mean, the sampling could be longer if you want to fade out even more. But in this presentation, this is just example how you can do it with a pretty simple approach. Because Houdini are still working on the tools to make this seamless without doing this, custom stuff. So now what I have here is, again, the combined surface field. Now I can merge them both. So what I have is surface field combined and velocity field combined. So instead of having two separate one, I created one that is seamlessly blended. And again, I cache this, as a new cache because it's a lot easier to load again for the flip solver. And this is more or less what you get by default when you are adding the flip tank. You are getting single velocity and surface field from your flip tank. So hope it's not going to crash. So after this, after this is a standard white water setup. So this is the feeding the fluid volume, like surface and velocity field, and this is creating white water source based on combined fields. So this is how our white water source is going to look, and this is the sourcing of, please don't crash, and this is sourcing for our points in white water solver. We can tweak here to see the actual amount that we are going to use in white water solver. So after that, this is the thing when I said that I created, please. This is the thing when I said that I create two collisions. So this one is I'm actually going to feed inside of white water solver, like let's say default workflow. So inside white water solver, at the moment I just use collision for the boat, but you can add the same thing with the creature. And this is just simple default white water setup, reading the combined field and reading that white water source. And this is just to add noise in a splashy area. So in terms of white water setup, like I said, all this is actually default standard workflow that you have from version 17.5. So the only thing that you need to do now is when you have low res, upres, is just to combine fields and blend them easily so that your white water and you can see here inside of white water solver, my actual domain, it's coming from the low res tank. So because the low res tank is actually the size of our sim area. So this is for the white water sim. And for the mesh part, it's more or less the same thing. Just for the mesh part, you also have particles that you need to include into the meshing, but the blending part is still the same thing. So again, this is more or less what is, so this mesh part is more or less what is happening in the particle fluid surface node. And I just put the stuff that I need, because sometimes you don't need everything from the particle fluid surface node, but more or less he's doing the same thing like here, just with a lot less nodes. So I want to create, so this is my surface field. I'm adding the VDB reshape. I want to erode my surface field. And so why I'm doing eroding, because my VDB from particle will create VDB from the particles, but I just want surface field not to overlap that area. I just want to be a bit below. Let's see if this is going to be fast or slow on this machine. So yeah, so now I'm combining the particle VDB and the surface, because now if I just want to mesh this, it's going to be hard to isolate only the top surface. By taking the surface VDB and combining them, it's a lot easier to isolate only the top part, because with the bounding box I can remove the edges from the left, right, and the bottom. And this is like how my low-res sim, like let's say VDB, is looking. So the same thing like we did for the whitewater sim, we want to remove this area here and implement the upres one. So as you can see, the idea was the same, converting to polygons, creating like low position attribute. And for the upres one, it's the same approach like for the low res one, just converting the high res VDB. So in this case, let's put it lower just to be faster. So again, the same approach, first converting particles to VDB, combining them with a upres VDB. So this is now the VDB that are coming from the upres sim. And the same approach that we did on the whitewater sim, this is just removing the boundary to clean a bit and converting to polygons. Again, the same attribute, transfer the low position attribute, and blending with same idea like we did on the whitewater solver, blending the edges from the low res one. So if I dive inside, it's a same approach, using the low position and sampling that bounding box density field for the nice gradient. I mean, you can use vex expression, bounding box, and do the same thing. With this approach, I like to use it because any custom object, I don't need to write that code. It just can be custom shapes, and I can get this easier blending area. So the same thing, it's happening here. I blend the edges, and the same approach like we did for the whitewater, converting back to polygons and blending with that, let's say, removed upres area, blending upres and high-res VDB. So this is how my mesh at the end is going to look. And I'm using the low tank as a bounding box to just isolate the top surface. So this is now how my mesh is going to look. As you can see, the edges are seamlessly blended, and it's look like it's one large sim without upresing or anything like that. You can always use some sort of filtering to smooth this area here to make your mesh even better, but these are more or less standard approach that you have in particle fluid surface node. You can go inside and see how they did it, but more or less you just adding the VDB smooth based on maybe velocity mask or something like that. So this is how my mesh at the end look. So the next step is actually taking the particles that, because I need to transfer from the particle sim, I want to transfer velocity and vorticity to have proper motion blur, and also to use it for shading. This is again the standard workflow in particle fluid surface node, but in this case we need to do it manually. So again, I'm reading the original low res, high res one, same approach like we did, transferring position, blending, because I want to blend velocities from the boat. And when I transfer the attribute, what I'm doing, transferring velocity in this case, and this is how my mesh look. And with a preview, so again, if I didn't smooth velocity blend for the boat like upres to blend it into the low res one, I will have a lot of details here in velocity field, like close to the edge of container. So idea is that we want to blend any attribute from going from upres one to the low res one so that everything looks seamless. And this is our final mesh that we will use later on for the rendering. And these kind of attributes like speed and vorticity we can use for the shading to add nice green area, like faking the underwater look. So this is more or less the, let's say, the simple approach how you can do blending between upres and low-res sim. If you have any question. No? We can finish? Okay. Thank you.